The topic today is to talk to you about, it's a massive topic. It's talking about generative AI in banking. It's no matter how you slice or dice it, it's going to be huge. So what I wanted to do was, rather than me talking to you from a position of saying, well, here's what the answers are, I'm going to admit to you that nobody really has all the answers. So we'll start off from that point. And then I'll tell you a little bit about, from my experience and my company's experience, what seems to have worked, what seems to be the direction in which folks are going, and what's the value that comes out of this, a year and a half in from that big splash launch of ChatGPT. So first of all, why should you listen to me? What's my experience here? So just by means of introduction, my name is Vivek Jetley. I'm the president of a company called EXL. And EXL is a company that's really based on looking at using a combination of data, domain, and AI, and using that to create outcomes for our customers. We are about 55,000 people strong, spread the world over, but the US is our largest market and our largest presence. And we really basically work with companies in the financial services, insurance, healthcare, CPG and retail sectors. Those sectors combine about 85% of our revenue. We're just shy of $2 billion in terms of total revenue. But what really distinguishes us outside of our domain focus is our focus on data and AI. At the company, I'm a president. I run what's called our analytics business. And our analytics business is something where we actually built up a team that works with our clients to work with them on all types of different analytics problems. Effectively, our focus was, we'll create the data value chain, which is basically how a company goes from data to insights, and how do they take those insights and generate outcomes from it. So at its core, a very, very simple, but a very powerful value chain. And then we started helping our clients in each part of that value chain. Started off with the predictive analytics on saying, okay, I'm going to bring in the people that will create the predictive models for you. I'm going to bring in the experience that comes in and creates risk models, retention models, cross-sell models, what have you. And then we went upstream from there to saying, I'm going to create the data engineers and the people that will help you get more out of your data, break the silos in your data, modernize your data legacy. And then more recently, we said, we'll create those insights. And unlike in the past where we would just give the insights back to a production team for implementation, we'll help you implement it and embed it into the workflow. So that team now, that helps with that end-to-end data to insights to outcomes workflow for us, is about 10,000 plus people strong, which makes us one of the largest players in this space, and certainly one of the largest players when it comes to financial services. So that's my 2 minutes of a shill for EXL. We're kind of done with that. Now let me pivot to what I really wanted to talk to you about. So we at EXL, as you know, we had 10,000 people, data scientists, analysts, everything. We had a very large presence in analytics. So when ChatGPT came out about 18 months ago, a year and a half ago, we had a very big question that we had to contend with, which is to say, like all of us were contending with it at that point, is this something that's going to cannibalize my business? Is this something that's going to hurt me? Or is this something that is going to help me? And then what should my strategy be? How should I respond to it? So at EXL, we figured out on saying, for sure, there's some amount of our work that we do that's going to get automated. For sure, there's some amount of our work that will get disrupted. We looked at, say, all the dashboarding work that we were doing, business intelligence, and saying that can be done a lot faster, better, cheaper. So that revenue is going to shrink. But then we also landed on the point of view of saying, look, we've got to be able to lean into this. Because if we don't do this, somebody else is going to disrupt us. And as a result of that strategy, we basically said, okay, we are going to start creating solutions for the industry, which bring in the power of data and AI together we're going to implement those solutions. So the reason I'm talking to you today is 18 months into that journey, we've had probably close to 400, 450 conversations with clients. We've designed more than 50 use cases, actual solutions that we've taken to customers. We've gone ahead and implemented 30 different at-scale examples. And we've created things that are not just in that POC mode, which is what everyone seemed to be doing for the last year, but we've actually gone into implementation at scale. So today, the reason I wanted to take this slot to talk to you is to give you a little bit of a vignette of saying, okay, what have we learned through that journey? And now, at this point in time, with all those client installations done, all of those implementations done, what comes next? How does this value get realized even further? So I'm hoping that that's going to be useful in terms of our conversation. So first of all, just a couple of slides. There was, with all new technologies, there's hype. And with generative AI, I think the hype was greater than most other things. So I don't know if you guys have seen these reports, but Morgan Stanley came out with a report to say, well, the impact of this is going to be $4.5 trillion to the economy. McKinsey came out with a report which said, we thought AI was going to be this much. They said about 10 to 11 million, but with generative AI, the impact of it is going to be, global impact is going to be 15 to 16 trillion. So massive numbers that people were throwing around. And then every single board, every single C-suite was basically talking about what does Gen AI mean for us? How do we think about it in terms of our business? And that created basically this POC mode or mentality where every company, every single client of ours was implementing something or the other. It was all done rather quickly and saying, hey, I'm going to have a team. That team's going to be set up with an API, and we're going to test out use cases. And everyone's done those use cases today. But there's a very small fraction of those companies. And certainly when it comes to banks, there's a very small fraction that can actually say today, you know what, I've implemented it, it's running at scale, and here's the impact that I have created out of it. That part, I think, is the part that's really the part that's going to start happening through the rest of 24. Now, where you believe generative AI is going to land will depend effectively on what happens in the next 6 months. Do companies start seeing the impact of this? Do they identify the use cases that they can extract value from? Or they don't. And the ones that don't will wait it out. They'll probably do the implementations and Copilot and say, hey, we are testing it. But the ones that are going to extract that benefit from it are going to keep plunging deeper, keep extracting more value. My perspective on this is in the 25 plus years of working, I haven't seen any technology that has cut this deep. By that I mean the impact of this is every single enterprise, every single company will end up using it. And within every single company, every single function, whether it's risk, whether it's marketing, whether it's operations, whether it's HR, whether it's finance, will end up using it. Now contrast this to some of the other technologies we played with earlier. Contrast this with things like, blockchain. Blockchain was very, very precise in terms of saying, okay, here's what the impact I'm going to target, right? It never was this widespread. So the benefit of generative AI, or the reason why I think it's going to drive a huge amount of traction, is the fact that it cuts across completely. And that's how we've been seeing it. So let's talk a little bit about what companies have done so far. So in terms of the way our clients have attacked the generative AI problem, they've all effectively created teams that are focused on 2 or 3 different areas of it. One team, let's call it the CIO's office, is focused on saying, let me make sure that I create the right ring fences, I create the right infrastructure, and focus on how the company is going to be using it. So this is the team that I've called here is responsible for selecting the infrastructure and the core models. So infrastructure, almost always the cloud. In fact, generative AI is going to speed up the shift to the cloud more than anything else. And core models tend to be, which LLM am I going to use? Where am I going to start working on this? The second team on top of that, outside of the CIO's office, sits within the business or within the chief data officer. It tends to vary. So these are the folks that are responsible for saying, what's the data that we are going to leverage? How is it that our data starts becoming modern and fit for purpose? And then the teams on the top are the ones where the value gets generated, because these are the business teams that say, I'm going to choose the business case and I'm going to go out and implement this at scale. No matter what architecture you see at any company, it tends to have these 5 building blocks and these 3 teams within it: IT, data, and business. Those are the 3 folks that tend to come together. And at its highest level, the applications of generative AI tend to also fall into 3 buckets. They tend to be internal, which is more, how do I use this to extract efficiencies? One of the biggest use cases, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit, has been what we're calling conversational BI. About 70 to 75% of the companies that get started with generative AI use it for saying, I'm going to use it to help my employees find information about the company in a faster, better way. So I already had an internal employee portal. I'm going to put generative AI on top of it, make that more effective. And it tends to be a very strong use case for demonstrating how you can use it and what the technology can be. But from our perspective, it's not a use case right now where we've seen someone actually get the benefits out of it in terms of tangible dollars and cents. You can't show an ROI on it just yet. The ROI part of it comes into what we're calling the next 2 buckets, the middle office and the customer facing. The middle office is where you see the most amount of traction within banks. I want you to see one portion of it, which is customer assistance. I'm going to talk to you about this in a little bit more detail. But this is one of those Goldilocks kind of things, where you're getting the power of generative AI, but you're not taking the risk of exposing it to a customer. So what I'm doing is I'm using generative AI to understand something, to come up with tips, to come up with live recommendations, but all those recommendations are made available to my employee or my agent, who is then talking to a customer. So there's a human in the loop, and that reduces the risk, that makes it to a level where your risk teams are okay with how it gets implemented. This has been, as far as banks are concerned, the most popular use case, bar none. Because it's, actually there's 2 use cases that banks are very focused on, this one and code gen, and I'm going to come back to that later. The third one, customer facing, this is where the promise of generative AI really comes down. Because this is effectively saying, I can do away with the way that I have thought about marketing, thought about customer interactions, thought about CX, which was always in segments, always in terms of buckets of type A, cohort B, and so on. And move away from that and get to a point where everything is personalized down to the messaging, down to how I'm going to talk to you about a certain product or a certain offer. And that's really where generative AI starts bringing in a power that we haven't seen earlier, which is the ability to do this at scale in real time and 100% personalized. And I'll talk to you about that in a later example as well. So these are the use cases that we've seen. And later on, I'll have the ability to take questions as well. This is actually a slide that really encapsulates our experience so far. It's a busy page, so let me just talk to you about what these blocks are. So every company, every bank really, when they start to think about implementing generative AI, the first conversation, the biggest conversation tends to be, what LLM am I going to use? What's my core foundational model? How am I going to tailor it? And realistically, with the pace at which things are moving along, you're never going to end up using one. You will have to have a solution that says, you know what, I can swap in and swap out. I can upgrade. Just yesterday, something brand new came up, which was, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to play with GPT-4o, but GPT-4o actually takes a lot of the things that we knew about rank ordering different LLMs and throws it out of the window. You almost have to do it all over again. So you always have to have a strategy that says, I'm going to keep looking at innovations that happen in the LLMs, and I'm going to have a multi-LLM strategy. And that's where most of our clients have landed. But the real focus or the real work that happens, the effort that happens, doesn't happen on the LLM, it happens on the bookends of it. So on the left-hand side, you've got data management and processing. This is effectively saying, what will I, for my particular solution, where's the data that I'm going to feed into the AI? What's the data that's actually going to drive my AI insights? And this is probably the biggest stumbling block, because most companies we interact with, the data is just not what we call AI ready. Tends to be in silos. It's optimized for production. It's not optimized for, say, a knowledge graph or a vector database. So you have to then do the heavy lifting, do the work in terms of doing the transformation. You have to set it up in the right way. You have to then make sure that the way the AI is interacting with your data is done in a secure manner and without exposing any of your data to threats. That's where the bulk of the work happens. And there's a second part of the work happens on the business workflow side, which is on the right-hand side. Once you've got those data insights, how do you put that into action? And an example of that would be, I've got my agent assist, it's coming up with a prompt, but how do I actually make sure that the agent has access to that in his or her conversation with the customer? How do I implement that into the workflow? And that's been the big differentiator as well. So our findings have been, if you go out and you design an implementation framework for Gen AI, in terms of the work, about 80% of the work happens in these two ends. And only about 20% of the work happens in terms of customizing the LLM and making that fit for purpose. This is my other favorite page, which is the fact that data at the end of the day is what's going to determine how effective your AI strategy is going to be or not be. Because think about the LLM as this great equalizer. You have access to it, a kid in high school has access to it, and your competition has access to it. Everyone's going to be using the same thing. So where's the differentiation going to come from? The differentiation has to come from then, am I using that capability in the best way possible? Am I actually linking it to the data, to my data? And is that capturing all the insights in real time? And is that giving me the right kind of lift? Now we see this, a great example of this is something where we've started using this in terms of marketing triggers. Can I actually start looking at a whole body of data that I didn't have access to earlier? And can I use that right now for creating triggers for marketing? We've actually started using generative AI for going through mortgage applications. Every one of us has filled one. You know the amount of data that goes in there in terms of your financial disclosures, in terms of your asset ownership, and so on. And it's usually dormant. It sits in a file somewhere, nobody accesses it. What we've started doing is saying, okay, we are going to have a generative AI engine, take out the insights from all of that data, read it, bring it out into context, then we'll create triggers on it, and now these triggers can be used for cross-sell. So in an instant, what was basically dormant data that was sitting in a file somewhere and just being stored has become an insight which allows you to start having a conversation with a customer about upsell. And those are some of the use cases that you'll start seeing more and more with how Gen AI starts getting used. I'm going to keep going forward, and I wanted to kind of get you to this page. So this is the page that we produced, which shows you how that AI landscape has developed for banks. This tends to this focuses both large banks as well as smaller banks and community banks. But the bulk of the use cases so far have been on that employee-facing side, the ones that I talked to you about. The second tier there is rep assistance, which is the co-piloting. And then finally, customer-facing, which is where at some point the AI itself is starting to talk to customers. Now, on the customer-facing side, things that I wanted to highlight there is hyper-personalized marketing. That's what I was telling you about in terms of being able to create a message on the fly. AI has probably taken chatbots to the next level. We've been playing with it internally within EXL, and it just transforms the level of output that a chatbot is producing. You're worried about constraining it for hallucinations, but outside of that, the level of the ability to understand context is just phenomenal. And we've been using that very effectively. And then we've started embedding it into things like digital collections, where now the letter or the message that gets generated as a reminder or the text, we're just using an AI engine for that. And it brings in the ability to kind of bring in a phenomenal amount of flexibility in how those messages get crafted. And again, all of those messages are getting crafted in real time for every single individual in a custom manner. I'm going to go through some of these examples just to talk to you about, where and how we've used this. Now, every one of these examples that I'm going to talk to you about, we've actually built it and we've actually deployed it in a live customer environment where it's up and running. So some of these numbers that I'm going to talk to you about, the ROI, as it were, the returns that people are generating are based on live examples. We also have demos of these. I'd love to be able to show you some of these demos if you come by to our booth later. We are in P731. We also have them on our website at exlservice.com. So if you want to get into the next level of these, there's plenty of there's plenty of material we can share with you. We'd love to be able to get that opportunity. But there's 4 solutions I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm going to go through the interesting parts of each one of them. Number 1, Code Harbor. For large banks, this has been, I told you earlier that there were 2 use cases that everyone's interested in. This has been one of them. And the reason they're interested in it is it's a huge amount of a cost save in a year where banks were very challenged on their cost side and they needed to kind of take out cost savings. So what does code generation do? It effectively takes all of the legacy technology that a bank had and had been sitting on, and it says, well, I can convert it for you using an AI engine, which massively reduces the amount of effort that it takes to convert. So a great example of this is all of our customers have SaaS licenses within banks, every single one of them. SaaS licenses tend to be very prohibitive, and the new crew that's coming from colleges and that's coming in tends not to be trained on SaaS, tends to be trained on Python or PySpark or whatever have you. But most banks have been unable to do the conversion away from SaaS and into the new tech because it just requires effort, it requires an investment that they couldn't do in most years. We've started using a generative AI package coupled with our solution on top of it to be able to do that conversion in a faster way and a more effective way. Our code generation, it works for many other things. It works for COBOL to Java as well. But for SaaS to Python or SaaS to PySpark, it's working at a point right now where it's almost 4 times as fast as a manual transformation. So think about that in terms of the overall work effort getting slashed by about 75%. The amount of time that it takes for testing is reduced dramatically, and the number of errors induced in the process have come down dramatically. So this is basically a faster method that is more accurate and is something where the bank can actually get a phenomenal amount of savings from the license costs that they can terminate. We have used this with a human in the loop. So going back to that golden rule of saying, don't let the AI make all the decisions. Make sure that the AI puts code out to an expert and the expert says yay or nay on it. That's how the solution's been designed. But in terms of use cases, every single bank, whether they're working with us, they're working with others, They all talk to their vendors about saying, show me something on code generation, and can I use this to make my IT coding a lot more effective? New coding, old code, what have you. So one of the strongest use cases tends to be this. Let's move on to the other one, conversational business intelligence. Now remember when I was telling you that when we started off our journey, we were concerned about saying what happens to business intelligence, what happens to dashboarding. And this is one of those things where I think the way we would think about dashboards or BI is going to be fundamentally different a year or two down the line than what it used to be earlier. Because effectively what AI has the ability to do is understand the context from reams and reams of different data types, bring it all together in context and have almost a conversation in terms of here's what the insight is, here's what it means for you. Now, we've done this. We started doing it internally. We've done it for a couple of different use cases internally, and then we started taking it to a client. But one use case came up for us, which was very interesting, where the chief operating officer of a bank wanted to basically say, I want to see what's happening overall in terms of the acquisition numbers for the entire consumer bank. And their internal NLP-based system was not coming up with the right answers for them. They were running into issues with resolving various data types, and it just was something that wasn't working for them. So they brought us in, and we created something for them which was based on the cloud, clubbing together two different LLMs, not one, and effectively came up with a solution that allowed them to use generative AI without exposing any of their data outside at all. So all the data sits within the bank, and what they're using the AI to do is just generate code and preserve the information security while generating the insights. I think examples like this are now, other folks are kind of coming up with those as well, but fundamentally I think business intelligence is going to be the one area where AI within companies, within banks, is going to change the landscape in terms of how it's used. So this is going to be a pretty big use case as well. One caveat though, I worry about the ROI on this because it's very, very difficult to actually say, well, I saved you time in terms of that insight. What was that worth to you, right? Or I got you an insight that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. What was that worth to you? It's very difficult to justify that in terms of here's the dollars saved, right? But what our clients have started doing is saying, look, you were going to give me money anyway to work on my old dashboard. I don't want that. I'm going to pivot that over here and let's use this. We've all talked about self-serve for the longest time. This is probably the closest we'll get to self-serve because it actually encourages you to have a conversation as opposed to hitting and submitting a form or what have you. Let's go to the next two, which are, to me, the ones where the return on investment is the greatest. And the first one here is intelligent document processing. I've been working with natural language processing for a very long time. We've designed multiple different use cases which took in forms, any type of forms. You had a W-2, you had a tax form, you had invoices. Within insurance, we had claims forms. And all of our work was in training the machine or the algorithm to read the form, to know where a particular text field was going to appear and start taking it in. And it used to do very well if the form came in a particular format. But the instant the format changed, the machine used to start having issues and had to be retrained. With generative AI, the fundamental focus has shifted completely because the context window of what AI can read in right now is so much broader. It has the ability of actually starting to read a form in a completely different way. It can read a form the way you and I would, because you have the ability now of reading in all of that information, putting that information into the right context, and then using it for answering a particular question. And we've seen a fundamental difference in the performance of our old machine learning NLP-based tools versus what we can do today with generative AI. And the strongest differentiation happens is when any type of a form departs from the prescribed way and goes into free-form text. This thing just completely outperforms NLP at that point in time. So what does this mean to you in a bank? It basically means any communication from a customer can now be put through a system like this, where it can be, a machine can read it, can extract the intelligence, and then bring it up to a human. That mortgage example that I was giving you earlier, you can take all of those forms that come in from a mortgage app, sometimes 600, 700 total pages, put it through this, and you can get the one-page format of saying, here are the triggers, here's what you should be offering this customer as the next product. We've used it for, in insurance, we've used it for claims forms. I can take in the entire accident claim form and basically derive out the ability to say, here's who caused the accident, here's what happened, and here's the action that I need to derive from it. The beauty of this, though, is that it can keep getting trained for new fields over and over and over again. So we've now started within EXL, we've just started training it for all kinds of different use cases. And what we found out was very soon we had a repository for saying all kinds of different forms that a consumer has in our life. We've been able to train the engine to be able to read those, to be able to extract those. And to me, this is going to be one of the most powerful use cases, because think about all the work that happens within a bank of pushing information to a customer and pulling information from a customer, right? That pulling part, all of it can go through a machine like this, where you've done the extraction, and only that extraction then goes to a human who can then act on it. It takes that enormous amount of effort and converts it into a fraction of it, about 75% down here, and it takes it brings in the intelligence of saying, okay, here's what you can do with that input, which takes it up to a very high level. So we love this for what it can be, and we love this for the fact that this can now be used to start driving marketing triggers and action triggers. And the final one for us is Agent Assist. This is the one which we've implemented at a very large scale. We've got multiple installations of Agent Assist going. For one of our largest clients, we've got about 6 million calls that are going through here. And what it does is, like I was describing it to you earlier, the AI is actually listening to the conversation in real time. And the AI basically comes up with tips on saying, here's what you should be doing next. The tips are all based on your own call history, or your own interaction history, or in some cases, your training manuals. It's the ability to say, here's what you need to say next. At one client, we've used it because they had a problem with audits. They had a problem because they needed to make certain regulatory disclosures in all calls. New agents were not making those disclosures. So guess what? The AI was prompting them on saying, here's what you need to say next. Here's what you need to say next. In other cases, this has been used for identifying customers at risk, just based on the inflection, just based on the tone. That customer's at risk, here's what you need to say, here's what you need to be able to come up with. And in yet other cases, it's been used to actually come up with triggers on an upsell. Here's what I think I've spotted about the person, here's what you should offer them, and here's what you need to create for them. And the use case is working dramatically well. So the average handling time, and I'm using this for the place where we're putting 6 million calls through it. Average handling time is down by about 45 to 50%, but take a look at the jump that's happened in terms of the CX. So the customer satisfaction rate has gone up by about 10 percentage points. It's, to me, one of those phenomenal use cases where you can take the new technology and use it for exactly what it's best at, understanding the context of a live human conversation and using that to kind of drive the next action steps. So a lot of examples, and I wanted to kind of keep these examples relevant. But what I'll do right now is I'll just take a quick pause and see if there's any questions before we go on to the next part to wrap things up. So any questions about any one of these examples? About Agent Assist or document processing, BI, Or we could just go back to this page and see if there's any examples here that are of interest. Go ahead. Sure. So the question, I'll just repeat the question. The question was, there's a lot of issues about about information risks. There was an example about code getting exposed at Samsung because they were trying to use Code Harbor and it exposed internal codes. And with a bank, that, as you can imagine, that's a huge risk. So one of the fundamental operating principles we created, and this is not unique to us, others have done the same thing, is when you're working with a bank, you have to make sure that everything stays within the bank. So no data and no code can ever leave the bank. And then what you do is then you say, okay, given that principle, what is the best that you can do in terms of creating something? And we've actually done pretty well, and others have as well, in terms of architecting that. So to give you an example, on the business intelligence toolkit that I was showing you, we needed to design something on the cloud which was going to pull the data and kind of serve up the answers. That would require the data to be put up onto the cloud. The bank wouldn't allow us to do that. So we actually wrote it in 2 passes. Pass 1 was basically we heard the instruction, fed that to an LLM. So this is someone typing in English and saying, tell me what the card acquisition volume was. That got read by an LLM, which understood that, understood what needed to be done. Then that instruction was translated into SQL code, and then the SQL code was pushed back to the bank, and only the SQL code ran within the bank. So effectively, nothing's gotten exposed, none of the bank's data. All you've done is you've understood a command in English, created a SQL code, and then pushed the SQL code back to run it. Now, when you implement it in that way, you have the ability of saying, like, by design, no data gets exposed. For the code generation, we've done the same thing. We've taken our algorithm, brought it within the bank, and made sure that by design, nothing leaves the bank in terms of what the code is doing. So with banks, you have to go the extra level. And that's what companies like us have been doing in terms of the implementation. The thing that's not solved yet, though, is regulation. There's regulation coming for all of these use cases, right? And just like with CCPA earlier, that regulation is going to be every state will come up with its own version. We don't know yet where that regulation is going to land, but we also believe that the power of the use case is so strong, the business benefit is so strong, that every single bank will come up with a mechanism of saying, okay, I understand the regulation, here's how I can operate within it, and here's what I'll do. The analogy I like to think about is when machine learning came about, nobody could use machine learning for risk because the regulators would frown upon it. But fast forward to 4 or 5 years later, everyone was using it because they'd all gone through the hump and everyone had gotten the right level of approvals. Yeah, go ahead. Got it. So the question is about what do banks have to do to make their data AI ready? So first of all, when I said data is not AI ready, what did I mean by that? The way the AI reads data is very different than how databases used to be structured. Databases, production databases in certain, are structured as rows, where each row is its own distinct identity, and you just are collecting different fields together. The way AI works is it actually plots everything in a vector database where it's got multiple dimensions, and it's trying to see how close is point A from point B, and how distant is it from other points, and uses that logic to determine what's the right answer. So it works fundamentally in a very different way. And what you need to do to make the data AI ready is to actually say, I'm going to create a conduit from what my production systems are, what my database systems are. I'm I'm going to create a conduit from that into this knowledge graph or vector database where I'm actually going to run the AI from. And once I get the results, I've got to create a method to push it right back out. So our experience has been in terms of saying, how do you take, rather than redesigning all of your systems, which is cost prohibitive, how do you create a layer on top where you're pulling this data in, using it to run the AI, and then pushing the response back out? And that's been kind of the workaround that we've created. But fundamentally, I think this is going to require a shift to the cloud. I think what you're going to see is, over a period of time, more and more data systems, particularly as it pertains to data to run AI, is going to have to move to a cloud infrastructure, going to have to run on the cloud, because I think the compute costs of running it internally are just prohibitive. Even the largest banks don't have the ability of running, the kind of compute cycles that are needed now for newer technologies. Most banks don't have the capability of doing it. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm official now. After you get the SQL query and sort of send it over the wall and then get the data, don't you have to send the data back to the LLM for it to actually generate the insights? Or is it like anonymized by that point, or it's like a combination of the data at that point, so you're not having like individual like customer specific data? Or why is that safe if it's continuing to kind of go back?
No, so the data never went back. So what we did was so the LLM knew what the data dictionary was at the highest level, right? So it knew what the variable names were. Let's say that, right? Now, when I, as a user, go in and say I want to see what the card volume was in the state of Nebraska for July, right? That's the question. The LLM understood that question, generated a SQL query, just the SQL query, and pushed the query back in. So now the query was run inside the bank's environment. So the answer to the query, the response to the query, was never exposed. The LLM only saw the English request and only generated the SQL code as a response. The actual data of what was the customer name, how many cards were originated, or all of that was never exposed.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, I think go ahead.
So when you talk about LLMs, Gemini is the word, when you say you implemented LLM, are you using those, or you're building one for the bank?
It's a great question. So the question is, are you using a foundational model like the Geminis of the world, or are you creating your own LLMs? And I think the answer to that has actually evolved. So when we started off, a year or 18 months ago, our first principle was we are not going to create our own LLM because it's cost prohibitive, takes so many cycles to do, we won't be able to do it. And at that point in time, all of our focus was on fine-tuning an LLM. So basically what we said was, we'll take one of these things, we'll take GPT 4.0, or we'll take Gemini, and we'll teach it banking, or we'll teach it how credit cards work. And by that we meant was, we'll write the RAG structure, we'll put in some level of a meta layer on top, which allows it to answer banking specific questions. And that's what we started using. Today, I think we are at a point where we think we can actually start training LLMs of our own. And we are doing that actively right now for both insurance as well as for banking, because we think we've got proprietary data which we can use to start training it. So I think the answer is going to really come down to saying, do you have the proprietary data which allows you to create an LLM of your own, even if it's a smaller one? Or are you better off using one of these large foundational models and teaching it or training it on your specific use case? And we've seen banks choose one or two of those, depending on their use cases.
A follow-up, bit related, maybe unrelated. So there's this, personally, based on what I'm reading, they're saying while it has huge implications on the positive side, but implementation of AI is hugely costly. I mean, is that true? And is it because of this building LLMs part of it? A little more on that will help, please.
No, I don't think, I fundamentally don't think using AI is costly at all. I think using AI is it's very quick. It saves you a lot of time in terms of the actual build costs, and the implementation costs when you're not at scale is actually pretty cheap. I think the challenge with AI comes in if you're trying to say, I want to create my own version, right? So if you want to say, I want to start from scratch and build my own LLM, which is constrained on my data completely, that starts becoming expensive. And it's my submission to say that most use cases, 95% of the use cases will not require something like that. You're better off using a Gemini or a ChatGPT or a Llama, bringing it inside your environment, constraining it and training it. And that's actually the best use case possible, rather than saying, I want to create something of my own. I've got time for one more question, and then I think I'll have to wrap up. Any last questions? Okay. Well, thank you. I think you've been a very patient audience. I can see everyone stream out outside there, but you guys are still here. So thank you. Thank you for your time.